Thanks, Shane, for that intro. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be with you again. Like Shane said, I'm Rick Murdoch. I've been with the Department of Human Resources Management for the last 8 months or so. And so most of the time I have been away from an office. I spent about 2 months working side by side in an office with the folks from DHRM. And then, as we all know, COVID hit, and I've been working from home since. And it's a different place, right? It's a different thing. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But before we jump into that, let me announce the next off-the-shelf series offering. It's called Navigating the Human Side of Change. JJ Acker is going to present that for us. It is in 1 week. As you may remember, this the session we're in right now was scheduled for last week. So usually we have about 2 weeks in between. The next one is next week on September 23rd at 10 a.m. I am going to put a link to sign up for that session in the chat box so that you can go directly there and sign up. This is a good one. It's all about dealing with change and the idea that transitions are the internal part of change, the part that we deal with so that we can accept change and move on. JJ has a master's degree in psychology, I believe, and he is going to kind of help us through that process. So definitely go take a look at that. Again, in the chat box, you can go there. There's a link right at the top. You can click on it and sign up for that session 1 week from today. And like Shane said, for those of you that just joined us, this session is being recorded. So if you'd like not to be seen in the recording, you can leave your camera off and try not to make any noise in your microphone, and it won't bring you up. But otherwise, we should probably get started here. I do think we might have somebody with an unmuted mic. I'm going to just go ahead and mute you if that's okay. And then we will be ready to roll. Okay. Like I mentioned, we are going to talk a little bit about virtual teams. But before we do that, I want to take just a minute to talk about the sessions we've had so far in the off-the-shelf series. And the reason I want to do this is just to give you a second to reflect. Some of you, I assume a lot of you have been to multiple sessions with us. These are the 9 sessions we've had so far. Leading in uncertain times, resilience, decision-making, outward mindset. You may remember some of these. I would like to take just a moment, if we could, and open up our chat box feature. The way you do that, there's a little call out in the upper right-hand corner. If you scroll your mouse over, it'll say chat with everyone. Click on that. That'll open the chat box feature. I would love to hear 1 or 2 words, a sentence, a phrase, of some things that you've put into your tool belt from our off-the-shelf series so far, from me or JJ or Dan or any of our guest presenters. What are some things that you've taken away from the series? The reason I want to do this is just to give you a minute to reflect, to see if this is actually worth your time to come every other week and listen to us talk about these things. So at this point, feel free to just jot some ideas into the chat feature. And now, if I am met with deafening silence, then I will have learned my lesson about this. But please, go right ahead. Oh, yeah, these are good. Facts versus the story I'm telling myself. Self-care leads to better services. We should stay connected. Good. The hope is that you're taking some things away from these and that you're adding it to your tool belt, and that these are actually developmental in purpose, and that they're actually working that way. If not, then maybe we need to reevaluate. But I do think that there are some things that we can take away from these. All right, so yeah, keep adding them. You can look through those while I kind of jump into what I'm going to talk about today. And you might want to keep your chat feature up today. We're going to use it a couple of times. The reason we want to use that is because it's a way that we can interact and engage without becoming cacophonous and a little bit overly noisy by opening our mics, in other words. So let's jump in. Like I said, we were meant to do this last week, and I'm sure many of you were affected by the storm that hit, Ogden to Salt Lake here. My neighborhood was affected, and that was the reason that we had to postpone. Here is a picture of power pole, maybe about a block from my house, just snapped like a toothpick there. And then here's another picture of a downed pine tree. That's not unusual for this storm. But what is unusual, if you were to zoom in on this particular pine tree right there, I'm going to do that for you. That pine tree picked up a car. And that's also about a block up from my house. So our neighborhood was affected. We're still cleaning up here a little bit. We were without power for about 4 days and without internet for about 6 days. So it's been an interesting challenge. I mean, it's real pioneer times for us. For those, the generators are kind of heavy to carry around, and I had to actually go to a gas station and get gas for it. So, and we used candles for those 4 days, but they were the kind of candles you get at Costco that have the remote. They're like electronic candles. Felt like a pioneer. Definitely wasn't a pioneer. But we're back now and we're ready to go. So let's talk about teams today. Think about your team. When I mention your team, do you have an emotional response? Sometimes we feel an affinity for our team. We feel proud of the group that we work with. We feel proud of the team that we compete with or that we go into battle with or whatever. It's an important relationship. The teams that we work with are important to us. And as things have kind of changed over the last year, maybe we've felt a little bit of change within our teams. Maybe we feel a little less connected than we have in the past. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, we will gear this a little bit towards virtual teams, but I think a lot of what we talk about will be applicable to any team in any situation. So if it's not exactly, doesn't exactly fit what your reality is, there should be some takeaways even still. We're going to talk about some best practices. These best practices come from a variety of places. Even I've talked to a lot of people who actually have been working in virtual teams for a long time. I have a good friend who's has managed a virtual team for the last 15 years, and his virtual team is global, all over the planet. And I asked him about some things that he does to keep his team together and functioning as a unit. And I've woven those ideas into the presentation today. So you'll hear some of those. Second, I'd like to talk about some ideas that will help you mentor and coach your folks. And maybe you're leading a team, maybe you're part of a team, but mentoring and coaching can come from any direction. And so we'll add those, kind of weave them into the things that we talk about today. And then finally, we're going to talk about mitigating dysfunctions of teams. And we'll start there. And this is more mitigating dysfunctions in general rather than as virtual teams, although it applies perfectly. All right, so some of you will recognize this. In fact, I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with this particular book that we're going to borrow some of this stuff from. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the 5 dysfunctions are as follows: absence of trust, the fear of conflict, a lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and then inattention to results. That's kind of just laying it out and you know, honestly, I would recommend going and taking a look at this book. This book is from 2002, so it's become kind of a venerable part of the literature. It's that kind of book that lays out an allegory with some kind of unrealistic dialogue, but we learn through that dialogue about the dysfunctions of teams in general. And this book has been used extensively by leaders, particularly football coaches. Football coaches have really grabbed onto this particular book and found it useful to them. And I think it's useful still in it, especially as a way of kind of framing how a team ought to function. And so we can keep it pretty simple. If we aren't going to get into the details of the book, we're just going to use it as kind of a framework. But if you're interested in where this goes, I would go check the book out. You can find it just about anywhere still. Yeah, go check it out. You'll learn some things from it if you haven't seen it before, or if you have, taking a look at it again would be a good idea. All right, so let's talk about trust for just a second. This is kind of a paraphrased quote from a website called Love is Respect. I like I like the definition that they've used here for trust. Trusting someone means that you think they are reliable, you have confidence in them, and you feel safe with them. Trust is something that two people in a relationship can build together when they decide to trust each other. In this case, our relationships are professional ones with coworkers or teammates, but it holds true. Trust is a huge part of being successful. And I'd like to point out in this quote 2 words that give power to the person doing the trusting, the trustor, if you will. And they are think and decide. When we think someone is reliable, we trust them. When we decide to trust someone, they get our trust. When we decide to trust, we have power over who and what we'll trust. And it's an important thing to remember, because sometimes we decide not to trust things that we ought to trust, or we decide to trust things that we ought not to trust. So how do we know when we can trust and when we can't trust? Well, within our teams, we kind of know, don't we? We kind of know when people are trustworthy or not. How do we build trust from our side to someone else? Maybe someone hasn't been as trusting of us. How do we build that trust? Well, there's a couple things we can do, but the most important thing is to be transparent, particularly transparent with the things that we do that could be considered mistakes. It's so easy to want to spin or cover up mistakes, mostly because we're afraid of where they lead. But if we can be transparent and open with them, and if we can build a culture within our teams where mistakes are allowed and we can be honest about them, then suddenly we start to trust each other because we are sharing things that make us vulnerable. The next step is conflict. We tend to avoid conflict, particularly when we're not trusting of each other. When we don't trust each other and we don't trust that we can be vulnerable in front of each other, then we will avoid conflict. And conflict is a really important part of a successful team. I'm not talking about blow up arguments and fisticuffs and things. I'm talking about the kind of conflict that means that you can share your opinion when it's a differing opinion and be safe doing so. When we can have healthy conflict within a team, we get to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. Here's a quote. It's from entrepreneur.com. Conflict can be healthy. Conflict can be a healthy part of personal and professional relationships. Extensive research has demonstrated that conflict, when managed properly, strengthens relationships and teams and can serve as a catalyst for better solutions, innovation, and growth. For just a moment, let's go back to our chat box. I'd like to hear what you see as healthy conflict. Let's define that for a moment. In the chat box, just give me a couple words, maybe a sentence or two, about healthy conflict. What is healthy conflict? What does it look like in your team? Maybe you don't have it in your team, but if you do, tell us what it looks like. Willing to agree to disagree, that's good. Mistakes not being allowed, not magnified, that's good. Freedom to respectfully disagree. When my opinion counts and is heard, even if it's not followed necessarily, but it's heard. Yeah, all of these things are important. Yeah, healthy conflict is so important, in fact. It really is the crux of a successful team because of what it leads to. And in order to get to the point where we can have healthy conflict, let's see, Anne says, I like the idea of expressing differences of opinion and feeling safe while doing so, and definitely not yelling. Agreeing to disagree and get to the other side of the conflict by working through it. I already have one person that thinks like me. That's me. I need to hear from people smarter than me. That's good. I like that. Yeah, so we have to build up trust in order to be comfortable with conflict. We have to. But conflict leads to other things. Conflict leads to healthy conflict, I should say. And there's a fine line, isn't there? I mean, we've seen conflict go not healthy pretty quickly. The idea that we are respectful of each other is really the crux here. Being respectful while being in conflict is an important thing. Anyway, so what these things lead to is the feeling that we are safe to share our ideas. And when we share our ideas, the best ideas bubble up. And our team is no longer about getting our individual rewards in there. It's about doing the best possible work as a team. And when that happens, we tend to buy into it, don't we? When we've been able to talk out our part of or any problems that we have with the idea that we're working on, or we've been able to give our ideas and maybe it's been accepted, we tend to buy in because we now have ownership of the thing that we've decided upon. And commitment to a common goal, as the quote says here, is one of the cornerstones of teamwork. This quote actually comes from a vocational school in Australia, but I love it because it says that when we commit, each member of the team focuses on achieving the team's purpose. Now we're all focused on one purpose, we're working together and we're doing well. Commitment to a team is created when all team members contribute to and agree on the objectives. Again, that healthy conflict has happened and we've all agreed to our objectives. At that point, we all commit. And when we commit, we tend to work a little harder than when we don't commit. Let's imagine we don't have the healthy conflict and we're assigned to do something that we think is stupid. We think it's not a good idea. And we haven't said anything. How committed are we to that idea? Not very. And in fact, we're probably holding back a little bit and we're waiting for it to blow up in everybody's faces. And then we're going to say, you're either going to say, I told you so, or we're going to say, because we probably didn't tell anybody so. If we had, we'd have that healthy conflict. But we'd probably say, I knew it wouldn't work. Or I've just been waiting for it to fail. We see that a lot in our daily work lives. And we see it a lot when we have, when our teams are not collaborative, when we get assignments and we're kind of pushed into an assignment that maybe we don't agree with. But if we do agree with it and we do commit to it, then our commitment leads to accountability. And when we're accountable, we tend to we work a little bit harder about things. This is from teambuilderplus.com. In a team-based organization, accountability is focused on the team rather than the individual. This means that team members feel mutually accountable to each other and that the team as a whole, not any one or two individuals within it, accepts accountability for the results of the team's success. Or actions is what it says here, but success also works. So the idea here is that accountability helps us lift each other. When we know that that member of our team is relying on us for this particular part of our project, we've all agreed to it, we've all committed to it, and now I'm going to get this done. Accountability is a powerful tool in motivating us to do what we need to do to accomplish our goals. So all of those things kind of build together: trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and it leads to the final thing, which is, before we do that, let's talk just a minute about improving team accountability. And one way that we can do that is to make sure that the specific tasks are specifically assigned to either an individual or a group. So if we have a step that needs to be taken in a process, we've given that step to a specific person who's going to report back on it. And we have also made those expectations very clear. This is your task. This is when you're going to report on it. We've communicated the accountability of the task. We've made it formal. That can take a lot of different forms. You can put it into a performance plan. That's really formal. You can add it to a spreadsheet that tracks your tasks and your projects. That's what our team does. Maybe use Trello or something like that. But you've got it written down somewhere. You've documented it somehow in a formal way. So this person is responsible for that action. We follow up. And the follow-up is something that is expected by the person who's been given the assignment. We let them know we're going to follow up on this in our next one-on-one meeting, which is next Wednesday at 10 o'clock or whatever it is. And then we hold people to their word. So if somebody makes a commitment, that is their commitment. Well, maybe they come back and they say, I've hit a snag, I've hit an obstacle. Well, as a leader, our job is to remove those obstacles, but we don't take back the assignment that we've given. Maybe we allocate more resources or bring someone on to help them, but we keep them, we hold them to their word. And this actually goes both ways. Sometimes we need to hold our supervisors and our leaders to their word. Once they've given their word, we can hold them to it. I had in fact, it really does go both ways. I had a boss that just loved brainstorming. He was a creative person. He loved to come up with new and innovative ideas, and it was just his favorite thing. And so he'd do that a lot. And every week I'd have my one-on-one, and he'd brainstorm a bunch of things and ask me to do those things. And then the next week I'd come back, and having spent my entire week working on the things that he'd given me, instead of following up on any of the assignments that he'd give me, he would jump back into the brainstorm mode and come up with new ideas and innovative things and give me a whole new list of assignments without ever following up on the last ones. And before long, I realized that these were not actual assignments. This was a brainstorm session, and these things were going nowhere. So I kind of learned that maybe I didn't need to be focusing all my time on all of these extraneous assignments, and I found a way to just find things that were more meaningful to me. He was never going to follow up on them, right? Well, maybe that's not the best thing. What I probably should have done is said, oh, you remember last week we talked about these things? Let me tell you what I've done so far on them, and hold him accountable for that, rather than just saying, oh, it's a worthless time. Yeah, that doesn't ever work out well for you, does it? But it's true. Sometimes we are found in situations where we have to hold people accountable, and it can be awkward and it's difficult, but it's an important part of making sure that our teams are functioning properly. All right. So all of this leads to results, team's results. And it really does come down to just asking, how did we do on that particular project or that particular set of tasks? And results themselves are not inherently positive or negative. They're really just an accounting of what happened. We love positive results, don't we? We love it. We love that. I don't know what it is. I guess maybe a serotonin brain bath or something that we get, that feeling of having an accomplishment or having a win. And we're really afraid of negative results. In fact, we're afraid to the point where sometimes we'd rather report no results than report negative results. And we do that a lot of times by saying, oh yeah, we're still working on it. Oh yeah, we've had to move the deadline out. Sometimes those we're still working on it or we have to move the deadline out, those things might just be losses. They might just be things that we should evaluate and see if it's even worth doing. And if we've built a team culture where we trust each other and we can have this type of conflict, then those types of failures or losses don't hurt. They actually can be used as a positive. Okay, what have we learned from this situation? I think it's a good idea every once in a while when there's a project that feels like it's dragging on and on and on, and nobody really cares about it, but it's still there and we're still working on it. It's probably a good idea to have a moment to really talk about it. And sometimes you even might want to take somebody aside, someone on your team, and say, hey, I need to know every reason why we shouldn't do this project. And I'd like you to be the voice of that in our next meeting on next Thursday or whatever it is. Tell us about why we shouldn't do this. Now, we may or may not listen to you, but we need to know. We need to know why this has become such a drag for us. And then have that conversation and really talk it through. If we have that healthy conflict over some of the things that look like losses, sometimes we can salvage a win, and other times we can say, okay, we've learned our lessons, let's walk away. There's almost never a situation where we can't learn something or salvage something from something, even if we're walking away from it. We've been tuned a little bit to think about things in zero-sum terms. I mean, we love our sports, and sports are zero-sum games, right? There's one winner, one loser. But in almost everything else in life, it's not as black and white as 1 and 1. There's always something we can take away from wins and losses. All right, so we get to results. Those are and really, once we've focused on results as a team, where we are holding each other accountable and we're committing to things and we're having that conflict and we're trusting each other, then we can really get functioning as a team. We can function really well. So let's talk about teams that have moved into the virtual realm. I think a lot of us have done that over the last 6 months, right? And we've been doing it for a long time. And right about now, 6-8 months into it, we're starting to feel maybe a loss of some things. The connection is not quite the same, is it? Like I said early on, I worked in the office with my team and with the folks of DHRM for just 2 months. So I'm pretty sure I wouldn't recognize some people if I saw them walking on the street, because I haven't seen them forever. And I only saw them for a couple of weeks as it was. It's all fine and good, but let's just take a minute to see what we can do to make sure that our teams are functioning well when we're not sitting next to each other. All right, so we probably need to think in terms of replacing what we actually have in our physical offices in a virtual way. We have casual conversation. That's hard to have in a virtual setting. We have cooler time. That's also casual conversation. I'm probably going to say casual conversation 4 different ways here. Yeah, talking over the cube wall. Eavesdropping. Yeah, so all of these things. Eavesdropping is an interesting way of putting that. It's kind of got a negative connotation, right? But eavesdropping is an important part of a functioning team. The example that comes to mind is in those 2 months that I worked at DHRM in the physical location. I remember a conversation that somebody was having a few cubicles away from mine, where they were talking about they understood the rules of grammar pretty well, but they didn't know what a split infinitive was. And I teach writing as a part-time job, and I know what a split infinitive is. So I just piped up and said, split infinitive is when you take the to and the verb and you put something in between. So to boldly go. And it's not bad to use split infinitives. It's fine. The only reason we think it's bad is because of a textbook in the 1800s. That was really stupid, and I felt really embarrassed that I did that, because it's kind of a know-it-all thing to do. But that person now knows about split infinitives. That couldn't happen in a virtual setting. I'm not going to overhear a conversation like that. And it's kind of a bad thing to lose. We kind of need these overheard conversations so that we can get more feedback from more people. So let's talk about this for just a minute. We've got our physical location and our digital locations. Let's just kind of look what work looks like from either one. In the physical location, we spend a number of hours there, 8 to 10 hours, and we're present. That's how we know that we've done it. We were present for 8 to 10 hours in that physical location. We're given assignments in that physical location. Occasionally, like the boss that I talked about earlier, it's the whim of another person. And sometimes it's something that they just thought up off the top of their head, and it wasn't all that important, but they just thought about it and gave it to us, and we work on it. And we punch our clock, and we produce results. In a digital format, we are not present at all in a physical way. And in some ways, that means that we are available more. Being there is not a part of how available we are. We have some responsibility to be responsive 24/7, really. Those assignments, those drop-in assignments kind of have gone away a little bit, haven't they? We don't have the whims of others. We're dropping some of the fluff. And then finally, we are punching the clock. We're putting in our hours, but we're more focused on producing results than sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day. And so there are some differences here. There's some subtle differences. There's some pretty major differences. Let's talk about the workplace in general, the physical and the digital location. So a physical location will have some space assigned to us, a cubicle, an office, and we'll have a computer, a phone, maybe a desk and a chair, a shelf, a drawer, a door, if we're lucky. And then at home, we're given a computer and a phone. And we have to find that dedicated space, don't we? I'm sitting in my daughter's bedroom right now. She hates it. but it's the best place to present, so that's where I present from. I've tried 6 different rooms in my house. Haven't found one that I really love as a dedicated space, but I have to provide that for myself, don't I, as a digital worker, a virtual worker. I've got my computer and my phone. Oh, by the way, in the physical area, we have some expectation of privacy. This is my space, and this is where I can leave my items, and this is where I log into my computer, that kind of thing. And in the digital world, we have some expectation of privacy. It's a little less private when I have several kids, 5 kids, and over the summer, we were all here pretty much all the time. And it does feel like you want to start throwing elbows every once in a while, doesn't it? Okay, so let's talk about our coworkers in the physical space, in the digital space. We can be given group projects in the physical space. We can eavesdrop. I've already mentioned that. We can have drop-in meetings. We can just drop in and see somebody. We can have spontaneous brainstorm sessions. We can have personal conversations, and we build personal relationships. It is important for us to try to keep as much of this part of our teams intact as possible. It's a little bit harder in a virtual setting. We can still have our group or pair projects, but the eavesdropping goes away, like I mentioned. Here's one way that we can kind of bring that, eavesdropping is a negative thing. I shouldn't have used that term, but we can bring that kind of back in, and that is to be really transparent with our communications. One thing we can do is we can copy our team on a lot of things that we're doing, especially if we want some feedback from somebody that's not specifically involved in that particular message. Just give them a carbon copy or a blind carbon copy. And every once in a while, what that means is our inbox fills up a little more than it already is, which is not great. But if we see an email from someone on our team, click on it, check, yeah, I'm carbon copied here, scan, oh, I don't have anything to add, delete. But that's one way that we can get feedback from people that are not specifically in that conversation. And it's really a nice thing to have. Our drop-in meetings kind of go away unless we're watching our calendar 24/7. We can miss the drop-in meetings. That every once in a while, somebody will say, hey, let's meet real quick. And if you're not specifically watching your calendar or your email, you miss it. So our drop-in meetings have to be replaced with occasional deliberate check-ins. We have to be a little bit more deliberate about that. We also have to be more deliberate about the relationships that we build. I'll talk about that in just a second. Our brainstorm sessions as a group kind of go away, but individual creativity can fill that gap. If we encourage folks to think creatively and to bring their ideas to these occasional deliberate check-ins, we can mitigate that to some degree. And then finally, keep those personal relationships by phone calls, DMs, that type of thing. Written notes are great too. Handwritten note through the mail, imagine. It's like the Civil War. But all of this stuff kind of works together to fit to fill the gaps that we're kind of feeling when we're not physically together. We kind of have to be a little bit more deliberate. Are we productive from home? Well, studies are showing that we are. In fact, the Harvard Business Review published a research paper on productivity of people working from home, specifically knowledge workers, but people working from home. And they found that knowledge workers are more productive from home. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Let me see if I can show you what they are. Here's some data from this article. Okay, so we have 2 data sets. The first one is from 2013, and all of these folks were working in an office. In the set from 2020, all of these folks are working in a virtual line. And so there may be some other differences that account for some of this, but really it can be interpreted that online kind of makes some differences here. So the way that these folks talked about the importance of their work, whether it was essential or discretionary, whether it was important or unimportant, changed. When we're working from home, we tend to focus more on things that we see as important, and we focus less on things that we think are discretionary or unimportant. We also tend to focus more on things that we feel like we should be doing, as opposed to things that we feel like other people should be doing. That makes sense. And then finally, We also find our tasks, the tasks that we're selecting for ourselves, more enjoyable, less tiresome. Makes sense to me. We kind of drop the fluff and we focus on things that we find important, things that we should do, and things that are enjoyable. Now, of course, there are concerns and challenges in working from home. And I know that at least some of you have been waiting for me to talk about this, because it seems so obvious. There are real problems with online work and teams. It's hard to be an actual team when you're not in the same space, when you're not on the same court or field or pitch or playground or whatever. The first thing, there is potential for shirking. It's easier to not perform when no one is looking over your shoulder, right? True, but if you're worried about this, you can look for ways to be transparent. Standing meetings, morning standing meetings, results checks, there are software trackers that we can use. All those things can help, but here's the real thing. As mentioned earlier, trust is a huge part of success in teams. And it's a huge part of an adult feeling valued, is to receive trust. Professional relationships need it. If we give trust, we tend to get trust. And so if we're worried about potential shirking, it's time to start showing some trust, and then checking results. Also, the rest of these are more tuned towards teams. It's really hard to form and storm in virtual setting. In other words, new teams struggle to connect in a virtual setting. So, there's a few things that we can do. Actually, let me show you a list of things. This is a list of some activities that might help with teams that are new, that are struggling to connect. These are just icebreakers. Baby pictures, you can have everybody in the team submit a baby picture, then you throw them up and you decide who's which baby. There's another thing you can do. You can tell a story, and the story can be an actual story from your team, like we can recount the last victory that we had or something. But the idea here is that each person takes one sentence and tells the story. And it's a great listening activity. It helps with listening, but it's also a way to kind of work together and build a bond. The next one is the 3 truths and a lie. You can do that. And then finally, this is one that I did recently that I think is pretty good. You can have your team show an item that is near their workstation that triggers an emotional response, and then tell us about it. So if I were doing this, I could take this camera right here and talk about how we use that camera to film family videos from years ago. Something like that. And the thing that does is it gets away from a sales pitch of oneself. It makes people think. It makes them talk about something that emotionally affects them. It's a great way to connect with people. Okay, so it's hard to form and storm. We tend to lose some of the social glue without regular face-to-face interaction. It's hard to feel connected. Leaders and managers, you have to watch for this. If you feel like someone's slipping out of slipping away from the team, we have to mitigate it. And you may have to do something like those icebreaker activities that I know some of you would hate. But it's an important thing. We've got to connect. We have to connect if we're going to focus, if we're going to trust each other, if we're going to have that conflict that we need to have, if we're going to commit to things, and if we're going to be held accountable. We have to have that social glue holding us together. It's really difficult to do long-term development virtually. Virtual calls, like video calls, are really great for short-term check-ins and small talk, but it's a bit harder to find time and bandwidth, so to speak, to work on the long-term development of our employees. And then finally, it's hard to learn from others. That on-the-job training, especially for a new person that's coming in, that on-the-job training of following a mentor around or following someone around that has experience, is really important, and it's especially important for knowledge transfer and for institutional memory. We have to find a way to mitigate that. That could be a real problem if these virtual teams continue to be something that we're doing. If it becomes a long-term thing, we have to mitigate that one. And so we'll need to figure out a way to get mentors and mentees together. All right, I've already talked about these. All right, the last thing that I want to mention here is celebrations. Celebrations are important. We celebrate our wins, which helps us feel good about ourselves, gives us that serotonin brain bath that we talked about. Also, it helps us identify things that are going well, and it keeps our morale high. We also celebrate losses because we can identify what's not working, we can learn from it, and we can jettison time wasters. We also celebrate individual achievements and team achievements. And we ought to probably take a minute to celebrate birthdays and holidays and special occasions the way that we did when we were physically together. It's important. It's important for connection. It's important in order for trust and commitment and all of that stuff. We need a safe place for feedback. We need to banish blame from what we're doing. And we need to identify any threats that we have to the psychological well-being of our teams. And one way that we can do that is by scheduling regular celebrations. And when we win, when we do something great, it's great to be proud of it. And it's great to talk about it publicly. You can define what publicly means. Maybe it just means you share it with another team in your department, or maybe it means you share it with your boss's boss or whatever. But it's important to do all of this kind of stuff as if we were still sitting together. And we should be listening to what our team needs. We should be taking notes about our teams and figuring out exactly how to connect with them and watching for signs that things might be falling apart. And we should also allow our teams to help us figure those things out. We should give autonomy to the team to make changes. Because as we transition into these new realms, we're not going to get it right the first time necessarily. And the way that worked 6 months ago might not work right now. We have to be ready to evolve. And the easiest way to evolve a team is to use the entire team to give that feedback. All right, final thoughts. Build trust. That's important. Emphasize sharing information and transparency. Measure what we're doing and define it, and find ways to connect and celebrate. All right, that's all I have for us today. Remember, next week, September 23rd, 10 a.m., Navigating the Human Side of Change with J.J. Acker. He's going to talk about how to transition through change. There's a link for you to sign up right at the top of our chat page. If you scroll all the way back up to the top, you'll find it there. You can click on that and go sign up right now for next week, 10 a.m. Thanks very much for your time and attention today. You will be receiving a survey. Please fill that out for me. If you have any questions or would like to talk about anything in particular, I'm available. You can email me at rsmurdoch@gmail.com. I'm open to talk about just about anything that we've discussed today, or anything that you might need some help from me on. I'm happy to address. Again, thanks again, and we will talk to you soon, hopefully. Have a good day.